All right, what is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. You already read the title. Today, we are going over the end of the Sepoy Rebellion, more specifically talking about why it was a failure. And before we get on with the video, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel and turn on that notification bell so you're notified every time you upload new videos. Um, so without further ado, let's get on with answering these questions. Uh, Hold on, let me go to the okay. So now, okay. These first few questions, 35, 36, 37, 38, they're not that important. I'm just kind of like skim over the answers so we can really have a discussion about this, which is really important. So in the homework that you guys sent me, I saw your answers. They were all right for these four. What happened to Henry Lawrence? Remember, he was the chief of the state of Odd, and when the rebellion broke out, he did a good job of handling it at first, but while he was like hiding out in the building that was guarded by loyal sepoys, the rebels came in and they shot a lot of cannons at his house pretty much, and he ended up getting killed in the action from an artillery shell blowing up in his room. So Henry Lawrence is killed in the city of Lucknow during the Sepoy rebellion. So that's what happened to him. By when was the rebellion mostly put down? By like spring of 1858-ish. This is not an absolute date. It's not that important to really remember. The rebellion went from like the end of 1856 to about the beginning of 1858. It's about a year and a half thing, but by like the beginning to middle of 1858, it was pretty much put down for the most part. Delhi was retaken by the British in September of 1857, which is very, very important because this is like the biggest, most important state in India. So that's when it was regained control by the British. So things are pretty much going to go downhill from there for the rebels. What happened to Bahadur Shah and his family? Remember, Bahadur Shah was the last Mughal emperor at the time who was named the leader of the rebellion by the rebels, even though he was kind of reluctant to join. He didn't really do anything, but he was in Delhi, and when the British, along with the Sikh regiments, came in there, obviously the Sikhs are not gonna, treat him too good. He's a Mughal emperor after all. So he ended up getting captured when he was trying to flee out of Delhi. His kids and grandkids were killed on the spot by the Sikh army. And he was captured and put on trial for treason by the British, and he ended up being exiled to this place by Thailand. I think it's called like Yangon or Rangoon, something like that. But that's not that important. But important thing is he was exiled out of India by the British after being put on trial. So that's what happened to Bahadur Shah and his family. So now we were at the most important part. Explain why the rebellion was a failure. So to kind of put it into perspective, this rebellion, it was one of the most significant events in India in the 1800s. And it had obviously a lot of effects after it. Some things benefited some people, so there were some things that did come out of it that, in a way, were good for the Indian people. But for the most part, the rebellion was still considered a failure, which we will talk about why right now. So, Prab, would you like to read your answer for this one?
First of all, they made Bahadur Shah their leader, so the Punjabis did not join. Another reason was that they lacked strategy, and when reading the book, at the part of the rebellion kind of felt like they did not know what they were doing and were dumbfounded. One last reason was that the rebellion was a failure was because they did not have proper weapon. They could have had gotten proper weapon if they had a plan from the beginning when they were raiding, and not let the British let the warehouse burn down.
Okay. So there were some good parts to your answer. Some things are correct, but there's other things I want to clarify that I want to make sure you have straight because some things were not right. Um, the beginning part, the rebellion was I'm reading your answer off of what you sent me though. Okay, so this is the exact same thing I just read. Um, the rebellion was a failure because first of all, they made Bahadur Shah their leader, so Punjabis did not join. That is true. The Since the Hindustan rebels or the rebels made Bahadur Shah the emperor of the Hindustan at the time, that of course this really made the Sikhs not want to join. That is a true fact. But that's not a reason that the rebellion was a failure. That's just a reason, another reason why the Sikhs did not join. It wasn't the only reason the Sikhs didn't join. Um, the other reason that the Sikhs did not join is because they really had no reason to. They didn't really like the Hindus over there. But this was the icing on the cake of why they didn't join. It's a true factor, but that's not why the rebellion was a failure. Um, the other thing that you said was right. Actually, that was like spot on your middle part of your answer. Another reason, I'm reading off your answer again. Another reason was the lack of strategy. Um, and pretty much that is true. That's one of the key reasons actually why the rebellion was a failure. Because remember, it was not an organized thing. It was not like a 1 day thing. Um, so as soon as rebellion started to break out here, people just, anybody who was frustrated or pissed off, they just started to rebel. So that's one reason why it was a fail. That is one reason why it was a failure, because it was not organized. And like you said, there was no strategy to it. It just kind of happened. Um, and the last thing you said one last reason that the rebellion was a failure was because they didn't have proper weapons. That's actually not true at all. Um, the sepoys did have adequate weapons. Remember, they were soldiers in the army. They had access to all the weapons. So the thing you said about the warehouse, um, the British wanted to make sure they didn't get a hold of a lot more weapons, so they did burn down one of their warehouses. However, um, their access to weapons was not a reason that they failed. They had plenty of access to weapons, and I do understand where this is coming from, because in the area of Punjab, remember, John Lawrence ordered for guns to be confiscated from a lot of the sepoys in the area, um, which it is true that that could have prevented some rebellion. However, we know that most of the people in Punjab didn't even want to rebel in the first place. But so what you're saying is kind of true in a sense, but it's not a reason that it was a failure, because the people who did rebel had plenty of weapons. One thing the British did was take away weapons from people in Punjab who they thought might rebel once the word spreads that there's a rebellion. Um, so British taking away weapons might have prevented some further rebellion, but overall not really, because the rebels had plenty of access to weapons. But I like that you were thinking there is some good parts to where that was coming from. Um, so yeah. Now, Shahan, you want to read your answer?
Yeah. The Sepoy Rebellion was a failure for a number of reasons.
Louder,
One
louder.
one primary reason is that they weren't very unified, which led them to be a smaller threat. It was small pockets of rebellion happening over India. Communication was minimal since it's the 1800s, and the British controlled the telegrams. Another reason is that there was a powerful presence of the British as compared to the American Revolution. The British needed to cross the Atlantic. However, in India, they had a tight control, and wherever they didn't, they had a sphere of influence. Not everyone wanted to rebel was another reason. For example, the Sikhs sided with the British, and many people were discouraged by the brutal killings they witnessed. Also, the Sikhs sided with the British, meaning the British army was much stronger. And the sepoys were also poor, limiting their weapons. This is why the Sepoy Rebellion was failed.
Okay, so let's go through the answer like piece by piece again. Um, so the first thing you said was the Sepoy Rebellion was a failure for one primary reason they weren't unified, which led them to be a smaller threat. That is true. That's actually the same thing that Prabhu said, that there was no strategy. That goes at the same exact point. Rebellion, it has to be organized, and you have to have strategy. You got to be unified. Everyone's together and doing it. And you're both saying that's not what happened, which is true. That's not what happened. Somebody started to rebel in the Bengal army. Other people were like, "Hey, they're rebelling. Let's rebel too." It was like flashes in a pan everywhere. Oh, they're rebelling. They're rebelling. They're rebelling. Um, so again, it was not organized. There was no unity and sense of togetherness in the rebellion between all the people there. That is one key reason why it was a failure. So I'm glad that both of you got that actually. The other part, it was only a small pockets of rebellion happened over India. Again, it's the same thing. A little bit here, a little bit here. Pretty much the entire area between Punjab and Bengal was pretty much in rebellion. Yeah, again, that's the only really part of India that rebelled. Communication was minimal since it's the 1800s and British control of telegrams. I think that's partially true. That the people of like Punjab and other parts of India didn't know the rebellion was happening for a while. So this actually prevented the rebellion from getting too much out of hand. Because right now, people are going to be taking selfies left and right, posting about the rebellion. Back then, it took time for the information to travel. So that's another reason why that the rebellion was not unified, because they didn't do a good job at communicating with anybody around. So uh, you said another reason that there was a powerful presence of the British. As compared to the American Revolution, the British needed to cross the Atlantic. However, in India, they had a tight control, and wherever they didn't, they had a sphere of influence. So you are right that they do have a strong sphere of influence there, um, but it's not because they have a strong presence there. Because remember, like you said with the American Revolution, America is just as far from India as far from Britain as India is. Like they're both far away from England, so it's not like it's a travel that they have to go. Um, and the presence of the British in India, they have the strongest presence out of all the European powers, which is why they're able to control most of India. And by now, 1857, they do have a stronger presence than before, because they're no longer in America. They don't have to deal with the French as much anymore. They're dealing with other European. But the thing is, the British don't have as strong of a presence as you said in your answer, just because think about it. What about the Anglo-Sikh Wars? They didn't win that out of their brute force. They won that through their strategic, like their strategic ways. While, and even now, you think about it, if all the people in India rebelled, or at least just the Sikh regiments rebelled, they would pretty much be out of Punjab. Like the British, it's only been 10 years since the Anglo-Sikh Wars happened. So they're really, really afraid of losing control. So while they do have a pretty strong presence there, that's not entirely the reason why it was a failure. Because remember, the British would not really have been able to put down the rebellion as quickly as they did without the Sikh regiments. The strength of the British in India is reliant on the Indian population. Most of the most of the army in India is made up of Indian soldiers. So that's the thing. The British strength in India is solely around the Indian people themselves. They're using the Indian people to rule them. It's very ironic, actually. Um, there's a lot more Indian soldiers than white soldiers over there. So, you know, but it is, one of the takeaways that you can get from that part of your answer is that, they kind of knew how to put it down. They knew exactly how to handle it and put it down, which is why another reason why they were able to handle it, without losing control of any areas. So, yeah, I like the thought process though. All right. Uh, Another reason was that not everybody wanted to rebel. 100% true. And you gave the example of the Sikhs not siding with the British. Okay, we know that. But yeah, that part of your answer is spot on again. Not everybody wanted to rebel. If you think about it, most of the people in Punjab did not want to rebel. It was really just, mostly it was the Bengal army soldiers that rebelled. We know why the Sikhs didn't rebel. A lot of the Muslims turned a snake eye towards the Hindus because they were trying to get them to join, and all that stuff. But yeah, that is another key reason that, again, when you have a rebellion, when you have a cause, you want to get everybody in on it, and everybody wasn't in on it. Most people were not, actually. So that's the thing. They didn't have the manpower in a sense to really have a real rebellion because, really a lot of people did not want to rebel. They took the side of the British for the most part. So yeah. So your answers were pretty decent for the most part, but there's I do want to expand this a little bit more and ask some questions to you guys. So just to kind of get into more reasons why it was a failure. When this rebellion broke out, Prab, I want you to answer this question actually. So when the rebellion broke out, what were the intentions of the people rebelling? Like the people who rebelled, what did they want?
they want they were just doing nothing. They're just burning stuff down.
Yeah, that is true. They were like destroying a lot of things, but what do they want to get out of it? Like by doing all those things? Because when you rebel, you have something that you want. Um, like for example, in the American Revolution, the Americans wanted independence. Um, what do the rebels, the sepoys here that are rebelling, like what do they want to get out of this?
They want more people to join them.
Yes, that is true. They want more people to join, but what do they want in the end to happen?
British leave.
Yes, that is true. They wanted the British to leave and who to take control?
Bahadur Shah.
Bahadur Shah, right? And him and also the rest of the Hindustan. So yeah, very good. Um, that's what the rebels wanted the British out of India. And that kind of goes back to the causes we went over because over time they thought that the British were gonna like contaminate them or like threaten their way of life and whatnot. But so that is what the most of the rebels wanted. The Muslims that took part in the rebellion, they of course want the British want India. They want the British out of India. Who did the Muslims want to take control of India after that? How about you answer this one?
Also Bahadur Shah.
Kind of, not really. Like the Hindus want their people to control India, but the Muslims want to control India.
They want themselves to rule India.
Exactly. Muslims want Muslim rule of India. So even though the Sikhs did not take part in the rebellion, um, if the Sikhs could choose, if they could, who would they want to rule India, or more specifically Punjab?
Themselves.
Exactly. So you see the pattern here. Everybody kind of wants their own people to rule, right? Um, it's kind of weird to talk about the Sikhs in this sense because then they were not involved in rebelling, um, for all the reasons why we talked about. But again, that's another thing. Everybody was in it for themselves. Um, the Hindus wanted their control, Muslims wanted their control. The Sikhs obviously want their control, but they know they can't really have that now. See, the point is, just like you guys said, there's no unity. Um, and another thing that I also stated in the notes, there was no identity um, to the rebellion. Because remember, anytime you have a rebellion or like a revolution or something, I think about the American Revolution. Everybody, there was an identity to it. There was one independence. There's a clear and cut thing that they want. In the Sepoy Rebellion, that really wasn't the case. At first, it seemed like um, a really good movement to get the British out of India. But quickly, it became obvious that there was no identity to this rebellion. Just like you guys said, everybody is in it for themselves. The Hindus want what they want. The Muslims want what they want. And the Sikhs, if they took part, they would want things for themselves. So again, everybody's in it for themselves. So if you're not unified, you're not going to succeed. That's for sure. And this kind of leads us into the topic of nationalism. Rob, do you remember what nationalism is?
No.
What does it sound like? Like the root word is nation, right? So if you're, if you have a lot of nationalism, like what do you think that would mean?
Like where they're from.
Part of it, yeah. So if you're where you're from, you're gonna be proud of where you're from, right? So nationalism is kind of like patriotism. You know what that is?
So you're proud of where you're from.
Exactly. So it's very similar to what nationalism is. So the root word nation, it's kind of like thinking of yourself as one nation. So like nationalism is like, you know, um, having pride in your country in a sense, being proud of where you're from, and having a sense of thinking of, whatever country or wherever area you're from, in this case, India, thinking of India as a whole, as one piece. Do people of India think of themselves as one piece?
No, because a lot of different parts.
Exactly, the different parts, and they each just want to rule themselves. You have, you know, you have things like, you have Punjab, you have like Patiala, you have Southern India, you have Bengal, and there are different people from there. Remember, like place like Rajputana, there's different types of Hindus there than Central India, where the Marathas are. Then you have the Northwest with the Afghanis. Like, there's no unity there. There's no thought of India as one nation. So there is no nationalism at this time, which is another reason why there was no identity to this rebellion. So I know we haven't really like obviously covered this yet, but at what point in Indian history is there actually going to be nationalism?
Indian independence.
Say it louder.
The Indian independence.
Right. So Indian independence is really going to be the only time in Indian history where there was at least some type of unity. Like it's very sad, like throughout the history of India, they were never really unified. They were never really one country. Even nowadays, they're really not. I mean, technically they are, but if you really look at it in reality, they're really not. It's really during Indian independence where they all went toward one cause, independence. Um, Even though still Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, a lot of them, didn't really like each other still. Um, that's the only time in history that there was even kind of some nationalism. So that's the thing. Like there is no nationalism here, and there won't be for a long time. And a lot of the people who did not rebel, they knew that. They knew that there's no nationalism, there's no identity, no unity, and there's no purpose because we're just going to fail. And the other thing is, what was he going to say? What was I going to say now? Oh, right. So if there was now, this is kind of getting to a lot of ifs and whats. So Prab, what do you think about this? If the, Sepoy rebellion, was legit, there was nationalism at the time. Do you think the Sikhs would have taken part in it?
No.
Assuming that, of course, I think the reason you're saying that's because of the thing about Bahadur Shah. But even forget about the thing about Bahadur
No,
Shah.
because like the British will be like not telling them to go because they never had a contact from the outside.
They, what I didn't quite catch that.
They didn't have contact from outside.
Not exactly. That's not really relevant there at the time. The thing I was trying to get you to say is that like the Sikhs took part in Indian independence. That we know that for sure. Pretty much all of India did. All the types of people in India did. Right now, obviously, the Sikhs did not take part. So this is actually in the book that you guys have, page like 166 or something. It says at the end of the paragraph, I don't have my book with me, but like, it said that like, if the movement was legit and there was nationalism behind it, the Sikhs most likely would have taken part. And the way we know that is because they took part later on in Indian independence, but not here. But another thing is, let's say the Sikhs did take part in this rebellion because one thing is the Sikhs could have still taken part in this rebellion, forgetting about things about Bahadur Shah and the Hindus and the Muslims. Let's say the Sikhs did take part in this rebellion and they regained control of Punjab, which they definitely could have. They have the manpower to do so. They did for 150 years. So let's say the Sikhs did take part in the rebellion and drove the British out of Punjab. What is the problem with that? Prab, what do you think would have been the problem with that? Like, do you think the Sikhs would have been able to keep control of Punjab if they drove the British out right now, if they took part in the rebellion?
Yes, because there's gonna be more people, and the British will fear them.
There is more people, and they kind of would fear them like they had for a while. But again, throughout the time of the Gurus, all the way to Maharana Ranjit Singh, what did all the Sikh people have? Like, if you have a lot of people, what do you need?
Leader. A leader.
Right, a leader, right? Think about it. The Gurus were the leader up until Guru Gobind Singh. Then you had the missile time. Who was a leader in the beginning of the 1800s during the Sikh Empire? Rob, who was that famous leader in Sikh history?
I don't know.
In the early 1800s, like about 30 years before this, who was a famous leader of the Sikh Empire? Like from 1800 to like 1840, who was the leader of the Sikhs?
Maharaj Ranjit Singh.
Exactly, right. He's arguably one of the best leaders in history. He was the most famous leader of the Sikhs at the time. So at every point in history, the Sikhs had a leader. What about now? Do they have a leader now in the 1850s? Do they have a leader, Prab?
Now,
No. So if they were to regain control of Punjab, which they probably could have, they wouldn't have been able to hold on to it. There was no leader then. Remember, during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, any little, social leaders that came up, people who thought back like Ranjit Singh did, they were either killed or shipped away, out or exiled. So remember, this is a new generation of Sikhs that we're talking about here. Now, a lot of your book and everything might talk about the older generation, the classic, Khalsa. When it refers to that, it talks about times of Guru Gobind Singh, the Mithils, and Maharaj Ranjit Singh. Those were the strongest times of Sikh history, like from like Guru Tegh Bahadur all the way to Maharaj Ranjit Singh. That was the time period in history where the Sikhs had the most political power. And they're all characterized by strong leaders. And the thing is, now they have nobody. Absolutely nobody. That's why they had to resort to, taking employment from the British. That's the best they can take right now. Because if they don't have employment by the British, they have nothing else. They have to turn to crime, which they did after the Anglo-Sikh Wars. So they have no leader right now. And what about the Sikh religion itself? Is it really like as strong as it used to be, Prab?
no.
No, we talked about this before after the Anglo-Sikh Wars. What started happening to the Sikh religion itself, a lot of the Sikh practices of the Khalsa?
They didn't practice it anymore. Like they're
Exactly.
somewhat to like Christianity, somewhat to Hinduism.
Spot on. Like, I'm so happy you remember that. Exactly. After Maharaj Ranjit Singh, a lot of the classic Khalsa practices were they were either forgetting it or they were getting mixed with Hinduism or Christianity. So there's no, even though the Sikhs are allowed to practice Sikhism in the army, there really is no Sikhism at this time, in a sense. No like traditional Sikhism because it's just non-existent. There's no leader. Um, there's a new generation of Sikhs who only know of British control. They don't know of the times of when Sikhs had their strong control. All they know is that they have to go to the British for employment. That's all they know right now. So there's a new era, a new generation of Sikhs at this time, who in a sense disowned their past. They're like, all right, forget about that. We have things to do like here now. That which is pretty sad that's the turn of events that happened. But and again, going back to the main point of what we've been discussing, why the rebellion was a failure. And it really boils down to no unity, no identity, which is pretty much a big part, no identity. Because when you have a rebellion, you got to have a purpose, clear purpose with unity among all the people. You guys both said, you guys had it. There was absolutely no unity. And people who did rebel, they wanted it in for themselves. And there was no identity, no nationalism. Everybody in India wants the British out. That's obvious. But everybody is not ready to take them on together. Which, think about it. If people, even just a little bit of people were to work together, they can drive the British out of India, no problem. And think about it. The British army in India is made up of mostly the Indian soldiers. So, the thing is, if there's no identity, if the people can't work together, and there's no clear purpose, of course it's going to fail. And the rebellion, it wasn't even organized. It was just, people are just throwing temper tantrums randomly out of frustration. They're like, oh, he's throwing a tantrum. Let's do it here too. So that's the thing, that's why it ultimately failed. It's considered a failure because the purpose that everybody wanted was to drive the British out of India and control themselves. But there was, again, no identity and no unity to it. So it failed in that sense. Now, a lot of important things did come out of the rebellion, which we're going to talk about in these coming weeks. But, that's why the rebellion itself is widely considered a failure. It's even nicknamed the first movement of independence in India, which it kind of was. That's what that's what the people wanted, to get the British out of there. But again, it failed for all these reasons. But yeah, don't confuse it with why the Sikhs did not take part. Now, of course, the Sikhs were the key in putting it down. That was very important, because of all the Bahadur Shah and all that things, you guys know. But yeah, that's pretty much why. And even if the Sikhs were to, take part. They had no leader, so they had no really purpose in taking part of it anyway. But point is, these are the notes from last week. Now, I don't know if you noticed, I cut it off a little bit putting it in the group chat. I wanted you guys to think yourself more into putting the answer to this question. I'll put the rest of these notes up today. Now, this bottom part, we're going to start next week, actually, the consequences and the results of the rebellion. But again, right here. So, right, the rebellion was not an organized event. It became apparent that rebellion had no identity, no unity, and no nationalism. So, that's pretty much why I was a failure. No identity. So, yeah. Are there any questions on any of this stuff? Anything you guys want to go over? Anything's confusing? No? Rob, any questions?
No.
Alrighty. So I'm glad that, we were able to have that good discussion. So yeah, the homework this week will likely be a reading assignment. Maybe not. I don't know. I got to look to see what you guys read. I think you guys already read this stuff. This goes into some of the results of the rebellion, mostly about the Sikh army. Because more Sikhs joined the Sikh army after the rebellion, which we're going to talk about. But I think you guys already read this. If not, maybe I'll just send out a couple pages. So if there's homework this week, which I'll look right after class, it'll just be a few pages of reading. That's all. But yeah, and I'll put the rest of these notes up today or maybe next week if there's really not much. But anyway, but yeah, so I was glad that you guys were able to do that. And yeah, so I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So yeah, there's my channel, by the way. Make sure you like and subscribe once I post a video for today. Yeah, and turn on turn on that notification bell too. Very important. But yeah, so if there aren't any questions, then you guys are free to go.